Nevertheless, Callus was a very smart and perceptive guy. With just a glance, he understood Vivian's intentions. However, he knew that she could be useful to him, so he didn't challenge her. Instead, he nuzzled her ear with his nose, whispered breathily in her ear. His hands moved restlessly over her body, squeezing and kneading her flesh. Vivian's body instantly started to respond involuntarily to his touch, but she couldn't stop herself from creasing her brows and exclaiming in a warning. Callus was gradually becoming more intense. No matter how much Vivian wanted him physically, she felt nervous to be doing this right here in his office. She grabbed his hand. "Gary, not here. Public." Callus smiled and shrugged, then picked up a remote control and activated the roll-down blinds on all the windows and doors. The room was now completely private. This was something that he had designed himself. The purpose of this shield was to make it more convenient to do private things in his office. The soundproofing was also important. The people in Callus's company understood the purpose of this feature in his office. All the staff outside the office looked at each other and exchanged amused glances of understanding before moving away from the room. Now, Vivian was all very clear about Callus's intentions. However, she was still blushing. I'm not really comfortable with this," she said hesitantly. Callus frowned. "This is my private office," he said in a voice thick with repressed desire. "There's nothing to be afraid of. Don't worry." As he said this, he pushed Vivian down onto the sofa and started to take off her clothes. Vivian looked around at the shutters and finally felt more comfortable. Following the deep, ancient promptings of her body, she took Callus in her arms. She planned to use his body like she planned to use his power and influence. A little discomfort on this sofa was a small price to pay if she was to get her ultimate victory over Natalie. They sank into an intimate embrace. The clock on the wall unheard by the engrossed lovers. As they made love, Callus noticed that Vivian was frowning and that she had her eyes closed all the time. He guessed that she was just doing this dutifully. "What are you thinking about?" he asked breathlessly. She opened her eyes and smiled, pretending to be thoroughly enjoying herself rather than just undertaking a transaction. "Gary, I'm thinking of you, of course." She smiled, but just then Bryce's face suddenly appeared in her mind. She frowned again and shook her head. Confronted by Vivian's soul-searching and lack of concentration, Callus suddenly felt that his pride had taken a big blow, and his face immediately took on an annoyed, petulant expression. "For God's sakes, Vivian," he said coldly. "Why are you so distracted? This is simply too much. How do you think that makes me feel?" "I'm sorry, Bryce," she said. "Just carry on." After hearing her say Bryce's name, Callus immediately stopped what he was doing and rolled off her. Complete silence ensued. Only the ticking of the clock could be. Callus sat there on the sofa, dead still. Vivian could clearly feel his tension and the coldness that was emanating from his body. She couldn't help but shiver, and her eyes filled with fear. To have stared at her in silence for a few seconds before Vivian reacted, she felt bad that she called out the name of the man she really loved. Vivian's face, who had been flashed by desire, turned pale. She stretched out her arms and hugged Callus. "Gary, I'm sorry," she said pleadingly. "I said the wrong thing. I'm really sorry." Hearing Vivian's apology, Callus let out a cold laugh and looked at her mockingly. "So, you said the wrong thing. I really didn't do it on purpose. Please, forgive me." Callus sneered. His indignity had suffered such a heavy blow that he just looked at her coldly again. "I forgive you, Vivian, but you really broke my heart," he hissed sarcastically. At this moment, Vivian's heart was full of regret. She was on the verge of tears. When Callus saw Vivian looking as though she was about to cry, his heart softened. Anyway, what did it matter? We both knew that we were only taking advantage of each other while we can. There was nothing deep and serious between us, he reminded himself. Thinking about this, Callus stood up and started to put on his clothes. Hearing this, Vivian was now crying, so he frowned. "Look, Vivian, seriously, I know that you said the wrong thing because of the emotional state. I forgive you, honestly." When Vivian heard this, her crying stopped immediately. She was pleasantly surprised by his reaction. Callis fastened the final button on his shirt. I have one more thing to do today, he said, looking at her intently. Put on your clothes and then we'll talk. Vivian was puzzled by what he'd said. However, she had no other choice but to do what he asked. After putting on her clothes, Vivian walked over to Callis. He was sitting on the sofa, holding a cigarette and smoking. When Vivian sat down opposite him, his eyes still showed the same passion that had been there earlier. However, Vivian felt that there was something else in his gaze that she couldn't quite identify. She had no idea what Callis was thinking about at that moment. Callis sat there smoking patiently, staring at Vivian without saying a word. Just when Vivian's heart was about to reach her throat, Callis finally spoke. Vivian, let me ask you, do you love me? Vivian stared blankly, caught off guard by this question. She hadn't expected Callis to ask her such a thing. Although the two of them were in a relationship of sorts, she had never thought about this kind of emotional depth to their attachment. She felt that she had no choice but to quickly reply, "Of course I love you." However, Callis clearly did not believe her. On the contrary, he revealed a mocking smile. No, I don't think so, he said, shaking his head. Isn't it true that you're just using me so that you can get your revenge on Bryce? As he said this, Callis looked quite dejected all of a sudden, as though speaking aloud the truth of what he believed had actually surprised and depressed him. The forlorn and resentful look in his eyes actually appeared to be totally genuine. Vivian was alarmed, and her expression immediately turned serious. Gary, she said seriously, that's not how it is at all. Of course I really love you. Why don't you believe me? She looked at him with a pained expression on her face. Dear listener, the upcoming episode will be today's last free episode of this story. Come back tomorrow to enjoy free episodes, or get coins now to continue listening. Vivian kept trying to apologize to Callis. Gary, I really just... However, Callis didn't want to hear any more about it. Enough, Vivian. Just leave it alone, will you? He cut in angrily. Vivian looked at him, startled as he went on. How long are you going to keep deceiving me? Let's be straight with each other. I'm going to help you get your revenge. In fact, I've already incurred the wrath of the Clare family by challenging them. And wasn't that all because I have been helping you strike back at them? Callis paused and looked at Vivian questioningly. And how do you treat me in return? Not only do you not love me, but you also call me by someone else's name when we love. It's too much. So why don't you just admit that you are using me? Callis' words were spoken very dejectedly. When Vivian heard them, she felt both touched and guilty at the same time. She sat down beside Callis, tightly holding his hand. Gary, I know that I haven't behaved in the best way, but believe me, I really want to be with you in the future. I mean that sincerely, okay? Callis frowned and cupped his forehead as though he was in extreme pain. However, secretly, in a way Vivian couldn't see, the corner of his mouth curved up into a smile of satisfaction and victory. In the end, Vivian took the bait, he thought. Excellent. Callis looked at Vivian and feigned uncertainty. Really? Are you saying that you really won't think about Bryce anymore? Vivian nodded. Yes, believe me, I really won't think about him anymore. And as long as you take revenge for me and help me regain my pride, we can... be together. Callis pretended to be casual. Vivian, you know that TDG might have to contend against the Clare group for a long time, right? And if my father finds out what I'm doing, he won't forgive me. So... Vivian naturally understood Callis's words. He wanted to keep his involvement a secret. And since she was anxious to get her revenge, she didn't care about the tricks that Callis used. She gritted her teeth and nodded. Gary, just tell me what you want me to do. I will do all that I can to help. Callis smiled inwardly when he heard this, but on the outside he frowned, shaking his head as though he was embarrassed. No, I can't let you get involved too. I've already promised that I will avenge you, and I won't give up, even if I'm short on funds. Vivian was deeply moved. However, she frowned anxiously. Short on funds? Oh, what happened? Hurry up and tell me. Don't scare me like that. Now was the right time to capitalize on Vivian's weakness, Callus thought to himself. He let out a long sigh, then looked embarrassed. Vivian, I hope you understand that I wouldn't ask this unless it was absolutely necessary. I really wouldn't want to do this. But right now, the project that I am competing with Bryce for has a shortage of funds. I don't have the money right now, so I was wondering if you could get your father to help me out. He paused before continuing. Don't worry, any money would be treated as a collaboration between the Willis family and TDG. In the future, when this project succeeds, the Willis family will be repaid both the capital and the profits. Callus smiled. And besides, he said, we'll effectively be family from now on, won't we, you and I? He looked at Vivian expectantly. Vivian felt nervous and hesitant, but only for a second before she regained her calm. People say that you have to give up something if you want to gain something. Naturally, she knew that there was no such thing as a free lunch in this world. Callus had already helped her so much, so it wasn't too much to ask for her to give something up in return. She nodded slowly. Gary, you're right. If you're in trouble, then naturally I'll help you. Then she frowned and added, however, you should know that since my wedding to Bryce was canceled, I haven't been home to see my family. So it's not good for me to directly ask for money right now. Callus nodded. Don't worry, Vivian. I believe that your folks will definitely help us, especially since we'll be getting married again in the future. We're family now, remember? Callus had been cynically leading Vivian in this direction all the time. His goal was to get as much money from the Willis family as he could so that he would have the capital to fight against Bryce. Vivian reflected on how, when she had been living at home, she had taken over the running of the family's business. So she knew plenty about the business and was able to make decisions regarding expenditure. Thinking about this, she nodded. Don't worry, Gary. I will definitely find a way to help you. And since you're such an outstanding man and so capable, my parents will definitely like you. Vivian believed Callus's words to be the truth, and it wasn't as though she hadn't thought about the possibility of marrying Callus if he really loved her. And it wasn't impossible. However, smart as she was, Vivian didn't realize that Callus was just fooling her with all this marriage talk. After Vivian agreed to his request, Callus felt proud and very pleased with himself. He took Vivian tenderly in his arms and smiled over her shoulder. If he had known that this woman would be so easily deceived, he wouldn't have gone to so much trouble earlier. And so it was that in the evening, Vivian returned to her family home for the first time since the disastrous wedding. Although she hadn't been back there, she had previously informed her father and mother about where she was. The reason she hadn't been home before was because she had felt that the time was not yet right. The lights of the family house were on, giving her a feel of the warmth as she walked up the drive. When she opened the front door, Vivian immediately saw a familiar figure sitting beside her father, Jeb, in the living room, Samuel Hammond. Jeb, who had a stern expression on his face, was talking to Samuel and saw Samuel's face light up when he saw Vivian looking at him. Jeb looked around and saw Vivian and immediately got angry. You, Jeb cried, so you still know where we live, do you? I thought that you have maybe decided that you didn't want to see us anymore. Vivian's expression turned serious and she lowered her eyes. If that's how you feel, she said, I'll leave soon. Jeb got even angrier when she said this. He glared at her angrily. He could only sit there in a daze, gasping for breath. Her mother, Dolores, who was standing to the side, also saw Vivian. She was naturally very happy to see her daughter. Dolores tried to smooth things over. Oh, be quiet, Jeb, she said. It's good that Vivian is back. You shouldn't always keep arguing with her. Samuel stood up and helped Jeb settle down on the sofa. Jeb looked at Vivian, still grumbling. Samuel looked over at Vivian and addressed her. You haven't been back here in such a long time. Why are you coming back now and upsetting Jeb? He asked Vivian. Vivian, who was already angry, became even more agitated when she heard what Samuel had to say. Samuel, what the hell is it to you This is my business, and it has nothing to do with you. Why are you so interested? Sensing Vivian's anger at him and her dislike for him, Samuel's heart ached. His expression immediately darkened, but owing to Jeb and Dolores' presence, he didn't dare to say what was on his mind. The hostile environment between Vivian and Samuel only added to Jeb's unhappiness. Enough of Vivian, he snapped. Samuel is a friend of mine, and of you too, see that you grew up together. There's no need to be so rude to him. Did you know that Samuel actually came over here today because he was worried about you? Think about that before you speak again. When Vivian heard this, she felt emotionally complicated. She frowned. Samuel and I have never really been friends, she said. I appreciate his kindness, but I have my own life. The reason she said this was because she knew that she and Samuel could never go back to the relationship they had shared in the past. She couldn't turn back from the poisonous path that her life had taken. The only thing she could do now was to keep walking and complete. Seeing the hurt on Samuel's face, Vivian also felt pain. However, she maintained her composure. She looked calmly at Samuel. I came back here today because I have family matters to discuss. Can you leave us alone for a moment, please? She asked him straightforwardly. Jeb and Dolores were shocked. The Hammonds were not a family that could be casually offended like this. However, Samuel seemed unperturbed. He even smiled. No problem, Vivian. Whatever you say. Jeb, Dolores, I'll be seeing you. With that, Samuel stood up and left, apparently unconcerned. Vivian breathed a sigh of relief. There was one person who knew her secrets and whom she didn't want to see. That person was Samuel. He knew her secret, and this meant that he also knew her weak spots. He might be a threat to her in achieving what she wanted. For a while, Vivian, Jeb, and Dolores looked at each other without saying anything. After a long while, Vivian could no longer endure the silence. Dad, Mom, I need your help, actually. I've come here. Seeing that the first thing his daughter asked for after her long absence was money, Jeb looked disappointed. Really? He said. You've ignored us for all this while, and now that you need money, we're supposed to be your friends again? Dolores was concerned, though. What's wrong? Has something bad happened to you? Why are you suddenly asking for money? Vivian had known that her parents would react like this, so she had already come up with a plan. She looked at them coldly. That doesn't matter. Just say whether or not you'll help me, please. If not, I'll cash in my shares in the family business and give control to someone else. You, Jeb started, obviously very angry. He pointed his finger at her, but couldn't say anything more. Seeing how determined Vivian was, Dolores couldn't help but feel sorry for her. Jeb, she said to her husband, Vivian has always respected us in the past. It's obvious that she must have met with a serious problem, so let's help her. Jeb had been completely exhausted by company troubles, family difficulties recently. He felt a bit helpless in the face of this new challenge. He let out a long sigh. Okay, he said to Vivian. Just do whatever you want. Bryce already rejected you, so I don't count on anything being successful for me anymore. The mention of this matter was a big blow to Vivian. Her expression immediately turned cold as she looked at her parents. So, she snapped, you guys are looking down on me because I've been rejected at the altar? Do you think I'm useless? Let me tell you, I will definitely avenge my humiliation by Bryce. No matter what, I won't let it. This face showed a resolution she had never exhibited before. Dolores was shocked, and her eyes were full of hurt. Vivian, how can you talk to us like that? We raised you well and always loved you, and yet you speak to us like this and behave badly with us? Vivian felt extremely uncomfortable hearing this. However, the flames of hatred had long since burnt through her rationality. She had no choice but to maintain a cold demeanor as she stood up. I have nothing else to say on the matter, she sniffed. I have to have that money. That's all. With that, Vivian stood up to leave. Jeb had not expected his daughter to treat him like this. He felt very hurt, but he could only cough heavily, unable to say anything for the moment. Dolores felt extremely upset. Tears started to run down her cheeks. When Vivian saw this, she paused for a moment. However, she steeled her heart and left without another word. She had already come this far, and there could be no turning back. After leaving the house, Vivian could no longer control her emotions. She practically ran back to her car, stifling her sobs. Although she had been forced to put on an act of heartlessness in front of her parents, she was still a person with flesh and blood, and seeing her parents looking so hurt had made her heart ache. However, she was also feeling a kind of despair. The sense of being alone on a road that she had chosen, but which now she couldn't step off of, as though fate was controlling her now, almost against her will. Dear listener, now playing the next audio series.
Mr. Edmund, you're worrying too much. It's true that Stephen is my illegitimate son, but I've never thought of him as family. He has nothing to do with me or the Addams family. Stephen's confrontation with the Addams family negatively affected their reputation. He even injured the pillar of their family, Steele. They'd never suffered so much humiliation in the past 1,000 years. You and I are on the same side, Terrence continued. I've also been thinking of dealing with Stephen's family, but we're all citizens of the same country. I can't do anything to them. Edmund shook his head in disapproval. Your culture values formalities too much. But from what you're saying, I'm assuming I'm the loophole you need. Terrence smiled. It's good that you understand. Okay, then it's settled. Just sit back and watch the show. The door to the conference room burst open, and Laurel barged in, hair disheveled and clothes mismatched. She pounced on Terrence like a mad woman, gesturing wildly. You can't. Terrence looked at her. A terrified expression was on her face. Ever since she went crazy, she'd been repeating the same sentence about a ghost over and over. Today was the first time she'd said something different. Did she experience a similar kind of shock that caused her condition? If it was any other time, Terrence might have given it some deeper thought. The distinguished guest was sitting in front of him. Laurel's crazy appearance would surely disgust him. Sure enough, Edmund frowned in distaste. Mr. Terrence, where did this crazy woman come from? Do you really think this is befitting of the #1 family in the country? Terrence smiled apologetically. I apologize. I'll explain everything later. He turned to the butler with a glare. Why are you still standing there? Take this crazy woman away. Edmund was right there. It would be too embarrassing for Terrence to acknowledge Laurel as his wife. The butler was scared out of his wits by Terrence's anger. He quickly called over maids to bring Laurel out of the room. That crazy woman is actually... Edmund interrupted Terrence with an impatient wave of his hand. I'm not interested in your family affairs. Of course, Terrence answered immediately. It was for the best that Edmund didn't care. Rumors of Laurel's condition should be kept to a minimum. Let's return to the topic at hand. I've heard that Stephen's mother, Victoria Sierra, was a sanitation worker for more than 20 years. She had a tough life, but her life's about to get even tougher. I have a slum in mind. Lunatics roam the streets there. I believe she'll be a welcomed addition. What was that? Terrence asked, surprised. He hadn't expected that from Edmund. He and Victoria had a rocky relationship, but he didn't feel right to send her to a place like that. Edmund narrowed his eyes. What's wrong? Don't you agree? Terrence hesitated for a moment before his initial surprise was replaced with a cold expression. No, I approve. Victoria was his past a lover, but that bastard she gave birth to almost ruined the Addams family. More importantly, those who had grand ambitions didn't care about trivial matters. Sacrificing one woman would be worth it. I knew you'd like it. After Stephen's wife, Kim Cassidy, I heard she's famous for her beauty and her successful career. What do you plan to do with her? Terrence asked tentatively. Are you... Edmund cut him off. No, you're overthinking it. With my status, why would I go for a woman with a child? No matter how stunning they are, they wouldn't catch my eye. There are a few people on his level, and a widow with a daughter was certainly not one of them. I have a friend from Warhawk who might be interested. He's been married 99 times. He's only missing one more wife to make it 100. I see, Terrence said. And he thought he was cruel. His methods paled in comparison to Edmund's. He was glad that Edmund was on his side. Terrence suddenly thought of Valeria. He wondered how deep Edmund's cruelty really was. What would he do to such a young child? What are you going to do with Stephen's daughter? Edmund broke into a grin. I know some people who have special hobbies. I've seen pictures of Stephen's daughter. When she grows up, she'll be as devastatingly beautiful as her mother, Kim. She'll fetch a high price. Terrence was at a loss for words. Edmund's crazy ideas didn't sit right with him. But when he thought about everything Stephen had done to the Addams family, he found himself agreeing. I've also investigated the other people around Stephen, like the beauty of Annapolis, Celeste Lindsay, the current head of the Sierra family, Stephanie Sierra, Kim's younger sister, Amy Cassidy, and her best friend, Jasmine Cruz. I have plans for them, too. Terrence opened his mouth, but no words came out. He didn't know if he should be amazed by how fast Edmund worked or if he should be terrified. It was only a few hours ago when Edmund's flight landed in Annapolis, and he'd already sorted out Stephen's relationships and connections. It was obvious that he'd come prepared. Terrence was cold-blooded and merciless. He couldn't help but shudder at the sheer enjoyment and insanity on Edmund's face as he explained his plans in great detail. Edmund's cruelty was widely known in Cadiz. None of his targets dared to come forward and testify against him. Even if they had, there was no guarantee he'd be brought to justice. He was just that influential. To smoothly implement my plans, I'll need your full support, Mr. Terrence. After all, this is not my territory. It's yours. Edmund spoke humbly, but his actions held no trace of modesty. He acted like an older brother and put his arm around Terrence's shoulder. With a cigar in his mouth, he smiled and said, "Would you be willing to cooperate with me and reap some benefits of your own?" If it were anyone else, Terrence would not be pleased to be spoken to in such a disrespectful way. But this was Edmund. He had the qualifications to treat him like dirt if he pleased. Above all else, Edmund's offer was enticing. After the Addams family's confrontation with Stephen, they maintained their position.
XXX video. XX.
Their reputation dropped significantly. The main reason was Castile's injury. With the pillar of the family eye, class families sought to replace the Addams family as ranked first in the country. Re-establishing the Addams family's prestige was the top priority. If Terrence could use Edmund's influence and expand past the U.S. and the countries across the ocean, their status would never be shaken again. Footing with the powerful factions overseas. Terrence and Edmund came to a quick agreement on a collaboration with one another. With the support of the Addams family, it was a simple task for Sanson Corporation to enter the U.S. In just 3 days, Sanson Corporation managed to use Annapolis as their starting point to make their way into the market. Many famous brands in the U.S. found their income dropping due to Sanson Corporation's sudden intrusion. Their business was not going as well as it used to. Their prospects were rather bleak. Edmund wasn't planning on stopping there. He called his employees into his luxurious office and pointed out Washington, D.C. on the map. They say the Wyvern Group and Tanith Corporation are leading enterprises in this region. Focus on them. They are our new targets. We'll launch a full sanction on Kim's business. The entire company heeded his order and got to work. This is so frustrating, Kim said, fuming in the CEO's office at the Wyvern Group. Sanson Corporation intercepted the big project we just signed with our partners. They would rather pay a huge penalty than cancel our partnership than work with us. Jasmine sighed. Kim, don't be angry. Our business partner has many international businesses overseas. He has to rely on Sanson Corporation. Their business would have been frozen by them if they continued the collaboration. They're clearly provoking us. That's not the only bad news. A few more business partners want to withdraw and terminate our collaboration. To be honest, Sanson Corporation is too influential. If we hadn't developed our companies to this stage, we would have lost the fight a long time ago. At the Adams family's conference room, Terrence was monitoring Sanson Corporation. He was